Zihan Song is a mapping products engineer working with Esri on ArcGIS Pro. In academia, she finished her master's study at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and her interests are visual storytelling and data visualization.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zihan Song, and I'm currently working at Esri. Today, I want to share some design considerations with you about map-based visual storytelling. I finished this work together with Dr. Roth. So first, what is a map-based visual storytelling? It includes a purposeful and partial sequence of maps and information graphics to advance a linear spatial story. It can be some statics map telling a story about road trip in Great Britain, or a website about slight dog race in Alaska. Actually, you might see them a lot every day, but just didn't realize about it, because they're getting more and more popular. News organizations like New York Times embed text, maps, and graphics in their news stories. Companies like Esri provide platform to their users to tell their own spatial stories. Comparing with this increasingly popularity, actually there's a lack of research on this topic, especially on the topic of how to design effective visual stories. Do the readers really like the story they see? Do the readers really understand them? And do the readers really memorize them? So, my research is focused on this effectiveness of visual stories. What design factors will have influence on the effectiveness of the visual stories? So of all the design factors, I focus on 3 of them. First, about the narrative structure. Narrative structure is basically how each part of the story is organized. And the second is genre. A story genre is a category or the type of the story. And the story trope are the visual variables used to advance a linear story. And these 3 factors will work together and finally have an impact on our audience. So let's take a closer look of these factors. Okay, so first I want to introduce you about the 3-act narrative structure. Some of you might be familiar with this as is traditionally used in literature and film. This narrative structure includes 3 acts. First, the setup usually provides user a large picture about space, time, social contrast, and characters. Basically, all the information audience needs before he or she moving to the following acts. In Act 3, usually it will introduce the problem, which is the key driving issue of the story, and the problem will usually produce a tension between the characters. In Act 3, the climax is usually the most exciting part of the story, and the resolution to a problem will usually be introduced. In this way, the story covering very different themes can sometimes share large similarities if they're designed within the same structure. So in my study, all of my stories were designed by using this 3-act narrative structure. So second, about the story genre. The story genre is the category of map-based visual stories. In current research, there are 6 total types of story genres in total. Like, for example, the first one, static news map, is really conventional. There is a story title and maps and some annotations to explain the story. And this classification differentiates each genre basically by the variation in their linear narrative structure. For example, the second one, long-form infographics, and third one, dynamic slideshow. The difference between these 2 genres is basically this long-form infographics enforces linearity by allowing the user to scroll in their browser, while the second one, dynamic slideshow, enforces linearity by requiring the user to click from left to right through each panel. And these 2 genres, and also the 2 genres that I tested and compared in my study. But the third factor is a story trope. A trope is a rhetorical device used to advance a narrative story. There are basically 7 types of tropes in current study. Like, for example, setting the mood means you use a giant picture or bold color or a scary-like font to setting the tone of your story. Oh, oops, sorry. And information dosing means you break a large chunk of complexity information into pieces so the users can understand them better. For my study, I focus on the last trope, focus attention. It means that the author used different variables to draw their user attention on a specific part of their story. And in my study, I focus on the two different design strategy. The first one is leader line. The leader line is basically use a line to connect annotations or images to the parts you want to address. And the second is color highlighting, means you use a different outline color on the subject you want to address. And these are the two design strategy of focus attention trope that I compared in my study. So here, of all these design factors, here is my experiment. For all the story design, I have two themes. One theme is sea level rising, and the other is presidential campaign donations. I choose two themes just to avoid the bias towards only single theme. And I have two genres to compare. The first is dynamic slideshow. The one on the left, you can see the user can click through each panels, and the one is long form infographics. The one on the right, like user need to scroll through the whole story. And I have two trope design to compare. The one is leader line, the one on the left, and color highlighting. You can see the trope is on the right. And so there are 8 unique design combinations in total, and all of these stories were designed with 3-act narrative structure. I conducted an online survey. 125 participants were recruited from Amazon Mechanic Turk. It seemed like Amazon Mechanic Turk is getting more and more popular, so people on that can see more maps. That's a good thing. And each participant viewed 2 stories in total. Of the survey question, there are retention questions. Retention questions are the benchmark tests, including compare, identify, and rank. And all of the answers were evaluated by the accuracy rate, so basically if the answer is correct or not. And also I include comprehension questions. They are open-ended questions. Basically, it's analyzed by the content analysis, that we want to know what's each user's take-home message, if the readers understand the story. And also I include preference question. They're basically if a readers like some of the parts of the story or not. It's measured by 1 to 7 scale Likert self-rating scores, and it was analyzed by the Spearman coefficient. Also, some personal background question were asked, as we want to collect information of users' motivation, expertise, and personal background. So here are what I found. First, about the 3-act narrative structure, this table is a result of all the comprehension frequency of each part of the 3-act narrative. It's color-coded, so you don't need to worry about reading the number of this table. So basically, the more red the color means a larger number, the darker the blue means a smaller the number. So like my first finding is the problem was the most salient narrative element in the visual story. So problem is this one, the darkest red in the table. So you could see that nearly 96% of the participants could understand and describe the problem of the story precisely. And the second, space-based characters were relatively successful. We have protagonists and antagonists in this yellow highlighting box. So we could see that more than half of the participants could understand about characters in the story. Traditionally, we think the characters in the story should be human beings, should be people, but actually they can be places in these map-based visual stories. Third one, the time frame actually was not discussed more in the responses. So here is the time, the darkest blue. Less than 1/5 of the participants could describe the time in the response. I think its findings share some similarity with maps, like how to use maps to express time effectively is always a challenging problem. So probably future direction for map-based visual stories can be how to use stories to tell time. And last finding is really interesting, as there was a bias towards effects compared to costs during a story comprehension. Like the one in the middle, this like light color one is the effect. So nearly half of the participants could understand the effects or result of the story. But only 1/3 of them could understand the cause. So it's an interesting find. Actually, the user is more focused on the effect or result other than the cause of the story. And also here is a word cloud generated by all the responses by the participant. We could see that there is a giant problem, like sea level rising and campaign donations. And also there are giant characters. We could see we have New York and North Carolina, Ohio, and Colorado. They are the characters in the stories. So space-based characters were comparatively successful. Second general finding is the story genre. Actually, this finding is really interesting and diverging. First, there was a higher retention accuracy rate with long-form infographics than the dynamic slideshow, especially in identifying the numerical facts. So here is the result of overall retention accuracy rate. The first number is for long-form infographics. The second number is for dynamic slideshows. We could see that when it comes to overall accuracy rate, this difference is nearly 5%. So long-form infographics have a certain advantage over dynamic slideshow. And this gap becomes even larger when it comes to identifying some numerical facts. It's nearly 10% advantage. And also, there is a better comprehension with long-form infographics than the dynamic slideshow, especially when users are interpreting the problem of the story. So this overall comprehension accuracy, the first one is long-form infographics, is nearly 3% higher than the dynamic slideshow, and this gap for the problem is nearly 7%. So this gap is really huge when it comes to comprehension of the problem. So that's one of the reasons that why I make my today's presentation in this long-form infographic scrolling way, because based on my own studies can help the audience to memorize and interpret things better. So hopeful after a conference you could still memorize my story or at least sending some tweets about that. So my third finding about story trope is also diverging. There is a higher retention accuracy rate with leader line than color highlighting. And this is the result of overall retention accuracy rate. We could see that the first number is leader line. The second one, sorry about that. There are two numbers. The first one is for leader line. The second is for color highlighting. So we could see that when it comes to overall retention accuracy, the difference is nearly 6%. So leader line certainly have an advantage over color highlighting when helping the readers memorizing facts. Also, leader line help the readers to compare the key factors, or in other words, understand the tension in the story better than the color highlighting. So this is the comprehension accuracy for interpreting the key actors. The leader line have a 10% advantage over color highlighting. And this finding shares some similarity with a study by Dr. Amy Griffin and Dr. Anthony Robinson in one of their study about exploratory geovisualization in 2015, about the leader line have some certain advantage when drawing people's attention to the certain part of the visualization. So last, we study about the impact of individual difference on the effectiveness of the story. So first, the feedback is really positive for both genres and tropes, as we ask audience to use 1 to 7 Likert to rate their preference of the tropes and genres. So the 4 is the neutral number. So the average point or score for genre is 4.6, and average score for trope are 5.2. So both receive positive feedback. The second one, interest and familiarity with internet and online source actually have positive influence on retention, which means that if an audience is exposed to this new online source, he or she will be more likely to memorize the facts in the map-based visual stories. And last one is an interesting finding about the concerns and beliefs. Actually, the personal concern and beliefs has influence on story affection. This table is also color highlighted. It's about the result of Spearman coefficient between the scores, the self-rating scores of the questions like, I think the sea level rising is a topic worth discussing, or questions like, I'm concerned about presidential campaign donations, between the self-rating score of these questions and the self-rating score about some questions like, I think they concern me, I think this story interests me, their feelings about the story. So it's also color-coded, so the more red means they are more positive, so it's more likely to be correlated. And the more blue means it's less likely to be correlated. So we could see that if a reader is more self-concerned or self-interest about the story. We need the table. So if a reader is more concerned or interested about the story, it's more less likely. This blue column is more less likely to get bored, but it's more likely, the red one, to be interested, to be concerned, or to agree with the visual story. And about my second column, the B part, is if a reader's rate himself a higher score about his concernings or interest about the problem itself, he or she will be less likely to not change his beliefs. So this is a little complicated. If he is less likely, the blue column, to not change his belief means that he changed his beliefs. So actually, his personal concern or personal bias on this problem or this topic have a positive feedback on the story affection. So the more concerned or more she thinks the topic's worth discussing, he or she will be more likely to be interested or be changed by the stories. So this, we found that personal beliefs and concern have some influence on the story affections. So of all these results, here are my really design recommendations. So first, use 3-act narrative structure for your story, as most of the users, almost all of them, can memorize your stories, or half of them can memorize the characters of your story. Design map-based visual stories, long-form infographics, as it can help the readers memorize your story and help the readers to interpret your story. Use leader line for addressing key point. It's proved that the leader line can help the readers to memorize story and especially focus on the key parts of your story. So if your story is a character-based, consider use leader line. Intrigue interest. The high concern or high interest will have a positive influence on your story. So intrigue the interest. If they're more willing to care about topic, she or he will be willing more to memorize and understand your story. So I want to end my presentation with a saying by Steve Jobs: the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. So let's make more great maps and tell more great stories. Thank you.